We're visiting with Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Waller, United States Marine Corps Reserves, in his non-military capacity as the Director of Infrastructure Security for the Center for Security Policy. I'm very proud of our partnership there. Tommy Waller is a man who has studied closely issues involving the critical infrastructure and needs of our country, notably, and I hope we'll have time to talk a little bit about it, that of our electric grid, the most critical of critical infrastructures. But we're talking with him about a focus of immediate attention from him and his team, namely food insecurity. And Tommy, you were just talking about the Chinese Communist Party waging unrestricted warfare, and it being perfectly possible that with the food that they've hoarded and the shortfalls that are emerging, including predictably, thanks to what their ally Vladimir Putin has done to Ukraine, this may give them considerable leverage on countries all over the world, including on us. And if bent on, as they seem to be, dominating the entire world, this could be very useful indeed. Let me ask you about one other piece of all of this, Tommy, and that is that also there are disruptions of fertilizer. I saw over the weekend urea fertilizer specifically, which is an ingredient for something called diesel exhaust fluid, which evidently is a critical source of combustive fuel for diesel trucks that have been essentially regulated into requiring such fluid. If they don't have it, trucks grind to a halt or maybe can operate at 5 miles per hour. And there seems to be a very substantial threat that there will be real disruptions as a result of lack of supply of urea fertilizer and the transport thereof. Give us a feeling, if you would, of how fertilizer shortages are likely to figure into both the costs in a moment of acute inflation, as well as the availability of food, and for that matter, transportation to get it to places.
Sure. Yeah, Frank. Food and energy are completely interconnected. The production of fertilizer depends on the energy industry, industries such as natural gas. Anytime the United States curtails its own domestic energy production, that is going to have a downstream effect on things like fertilizer. Of course, it's going to have a downstream effect on things like transportation if we're not producing our own fuel for that. But we also, as you mentioned, we depend on urea, which is then, of course, put into this DEF, this diesel exhaust fluid. And look, this is not my words, but the end of April, Shamir Koner, who is the CEO of Pilot and Flying J, talked about, in his words, the possible catastrophe that could come if there's
absolute catastrophe, I think were his exact words.
Absolute catastrophe. That's right. And this is something I think needs to be investigated, Frank. Why would Union Pacific Railroad impose a 26% service reduction in Pilot's ability to transport DEF via rail? I don't have an answer right now. I don't think there's a good answer right now, Frank, honestly. Yeah. But it comes at a time where we need our trucks to be transporting. We need our tractors to be breaking ground and harvesting. And so, we've seen it before where very, very powerful corporate actors in the past have manipulated products and markets for the sake of profit. I mean, I can't tell you that something like that's going on right now. What I can tell you that if such a thing was happening, it could have a severe effect on people's lives and, of course, their livelihoods.
Yeah. And that's really what this comes down to at the end of the day, isn't it? That we may see literally survival on the line in lots of places. What's your current projection, Tommy, as to how acute the empty shelves and inadequacies of food might prove to be in this country at the moment?
So we talked before about Africa and Europe are going to probably get hit first. We are very blessed in the United States that we have an abundant ability to produce food. But I will say, and this is something that I thanked the ladies last night, the American agri-women. They represent just 2% of our country's population. 98% of us depend on them, on the farmers. And most people are aware that the farms are nowhere near the population centers. And so there's a situation where we take for granted the ability to go to the grocery store and get food, kind of the same way we take for granted flipping the light switch on and
Right.
lights coming on because of the U.S. electric grid. And so what I worry about are all of the vulnerabilities associated with this magnificent system that allows our country to feed 330 million people with only 2% of its population. That that major system is vulnerable to economic warfare, of course, sabotage and kinetic warfare, cyber warfare. We've seen a 608% increase in malware attacks in the food and agriculture industry from 2019 to 2020.
Wow.
And of course, the fact that all of it relies on electricity, and we currently do far too less to protect our electric grid, are reasons why I am very concerned about the nation's food security. And so, Frank, that's why we're doing a report on it. The report is called Food Security is National Security. We hope to have that out this month. And of course, your viewers would be able to do a deep dive into all these areas and get an idea of what it is that we're concerned about and what we think needs to be done about it.
Great, Tommy. This will be available at securefreedom.org. Tommy, let me just come back to the grid situation, because you've spent a prodigious amount of time warning about the vulnerabilities of that piece of infrastructure, as I say, the most critical of all, because without it, none of the other critical infrastructures can operate. When you look at what is both the current vulnerability and what we know we could do about it, Tommy, give us a sense of what it will take, as you see it, for us to assure that when we hit that light switch, we'll be able to continue to rely on it in terms of making the grid more resilient against these kinds of threats that could disrupt it, as well as all the rest of those infrastructures, including food.
Well, Frank, it's going to take bottom-up action. Ultimately, we're going to keep fighting this struggle from the top down. I mean, this Friday I'll be briefing the Secretary of Energy again for her quarterly advisory board meeting. But by and large, the federal government has failed and continues to fail to protect the grid. And so this is going to have to go from the bottom up. I will tell you that in our Food Security as National Security report, I will have a case study. And this is something I hope will be an example to inspire local level leaders. I'm going to have a case study about an electrical substation, this one substation. I'm not going to tell you anybody where it's at, that supports chicken processing, 650,000 chickens a day processed, a major dairy refrigeration and transportation and logistics hub, and two major regional grocery refrigeration and distribution hubs, all on one substation that's completely wide open, unguarded from any form of attack. And it's that awareness at the local level that's going to make the most difference, so that those leaders and the electric utilities themselves can wake up and realize we're the ones keeping that industry going, and that industry is feeding America. So we've got to protect our gear.
Yeah. And I guess, Tommy, one of the other facets of this is if those industries that depend critically upon a single substation, a single unprotected substation, most especially, were to join forces with, for example, our Secure the Grid coalition, which you lead. And I really commend everybody to check out the extraordinary resource that it represents at securethegrid.com. We could see, the pressure becoming irresistible to actually get the steps that have been long overdue taken to make our grid more resilient. And I'm also very encouraged, and Tommy, you've played a big role in bringing this about. There's a new documentary film by David Tice called Grid Down, Power Up that is going to hopefully become a vehicle for this kind of mobilization from the grassroots up. It's one of several new assets that will be brought to bear to educate the American people. Thank you for what you do in this regard, Tommy, not least our report on food security coming up, as well as, of course, all the work at securethegrid.com. We're going to turn next to another challenge, protecting Christians around the world. And our colleague Didi Lawgeson will be talking about what's happening in Nigeria and elsewhere right after this.